Even though I don't do MRI very much anymore, and even when I did MRI, it was all vascular MRI. One of the things that I had to do, okay, why are you not, there it is. One of the things that I used to have to do is that anytime I did research, the only time the MRI wasn't busy was 2 o'clock in the morning. So if you wanted to do research and didn't want to have to deal with the department saying, okay, you're taking up valuable patient time, back in the day when we only had one magnet, research had to be done at 2 in the morning. So for me, I was trying to learn, trying to figure out how to image stents and inside of stents. So I'd go up and get the key to the magnet and go down to the basement and run my tests. And I was the only person in that room. If I had had injury, no one would know about it. If I had been, if the oxygen alarms had gone off, I was incapacitated, no one would have known about it. So thankfully that didn't happen. But we have a variety of issues with magnet safety. They are incredibly dangerous pieces of equipment. And most people don't know about it because they don't look dangerous. There's just a box with a hole in it. So we've got two kinds of safety. We've already talked about contrast safety. Dr. Chatterley the other day had a great talk about MR contrast. So we're going to talk about magnet safety. So the American College of Radiology came up with a idea. They have ACR zone, safety zones, zones 1 through 4. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. First, just to get the idea of how strong this is. So here, this is the definition of a Gauss. Centimeter gram second unit of magnetic flux. Okay, it's equal to 10 to the minus 4th Tesla. So 1 Tesla is 10,000 Gauss. And when you get a very strong magnet, it can do pull all sorts of strange things into it. This is for cleaning the floor polisher. Hopefully there was no patient in the wheelchair. Personally, I love the whole bed stuck in the magnet. And then this is one of the worst things that you can get is an oxygen bottle that is moved in. So you should never have steel oxygen bottles anywhere in the MRI suite at all. Don't let them get anywhere near the suite. There's aluminum bottles now, and they will not do this. Unfortunately, there was a case that happened not too far from my hospital. Back in 2001, an oxygen bottle was carried into the magnet, and there was a 6-year-old boy inside the magnet, and he was crushed. It's a terrible, terrible thing to happen, and it should never happen. However, sometimes things do. Here's one where a person died whose pacemaker malfunctioned when they were put in a magnet. We had a talk the other day talking about MR safety of objects and things like that. Older pacemakers were not safe to put into magnets. Anything that is magnetically controlled is in danger of malfunctioning when they get put into these magnetic fields. Anything above 5 Gauss is considered unsafe for most of these things. So you've got to worry about, the first thing to worry about is, as they say, projectile effect. Something being picked up by the magnet and pulled in. Everything you can imagine has gone in. You could even have the police officer that's guarding a patient comes in and he still has his gun. The gun gets pulled out of the holster and goes into the magnet. It doesn't look, as I said, it doesn't look dangerous. Now, see if we can get this to happen. I've got a couple videos of people that have, had fun with magnets. When the magnet is going to be decommissioned and turned off and basically thrown away, sometimes you get people that want to throw things into it just to see what happens. So this is a stapler that she's going to throw into the magnet. What do you think it's going to do? What? Well, the magnet will, Doesn't look like she's holding it, and very hard to hold, right, where she's standing. Most of the modern magnets are actively shielded for magnetics, so the magnetic field drops off dramatically with distance. The one thing about it, as it gets closer, it's going to pull harder and harder and harder and harder. So once like imagine the poor gentleman with the floor polisher, he's polishing the floor, and it gets closer, and it starts to, as it gets closer, he can't stop it anymore. If he was still at the door and didn't let it go, he could have gotten out. Well, as you get closer, and what happens is, so as it gets closer, and then it starts to fly, it speeds up, goes through the magnet, has enough speed to go back out the other side, and then come back in, and go back and forth and back and forth. And that's one of the other dangers, is even if it just went in and stuck, it might be okay, but it will sit there and vibrate back and forth in the field. And let's see if we can I've got 2 of these, and we won't play the whole thing. You don't really see it. There it goes, and there it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And eventually, it'll stick to the bore. So that's the thing. And those oxygen bottles do exactly the same thing, and that's why they're so dangerous. So actually this would be a lot of fun. But now the other thing is, once it's in there, when it's in the middle, you can grab it and move it around. I've actually done that with an oxygen bottle. You can feel it. You just can't pull it. Notice he just can't pull it any farther, because as he starts pulling it out of the isocenter of the magnet, it'll start getting, the pull on it is stronger and stronger and stronger. This one, it just give you an idea of how much force is on this. This one, this is a 4 Tesla magnet. And what they were going to do on this is they actually put things, tied it up with straps, and they slowly levered things into the magnet and have a scale. And this is in pounds, so take the number, divide it by 2.2 to get kilograms. So this is just a wrench. So they eventually try other bigger things, like eventually a chair. And let's see, we're gonna not. And as they slowly let it get closer, as I said, it's gonna pull harder. This actually was a 4 Tesla magnet, so it was a very strong magnet. And as it gets closer and closer, the chair falls apart. It's just not strong enough. And then, let's see, up there, the chair partially breaks. And at this point, it now has 600 kilos on it. And as it gets even closer, it's up over almost to 2,000 kilos. So we don't need to go any farther with this. So they're very, very, very strong, and you just don't notice it. So the Earth's magnetic field is 0.25 Gauss. A 7 Tesla magnet is 70,000 Gauss. So it's so much stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. It isn't funny. So here's our diagram. So we have zone 1, that's anywhere in the building outside the MRI suite. Patient, zone 2, patient waiting rooms, toilets, patient interviews, changing areas. And this is here where you have, as they say, ferrous quarantine. Anything that the person has that's metal that could be attracted. And we have storage for their clothes, patient transfer, if for say they came in a wheelchair, have to transfer them to something that's not going to be pulled into the magnet. And then they have lockers to store their goods. Then we get into screening. So then there is a technologist that sits and talks to the patient and says, okay, do you have any metal in you? Do you work, what do you do for a living? What's one of the jobs that you have to worry about? Metal workers, particularly people in the car industry that used to stay underneath the car welding mufflers and things like that, because they can have metal shavings in their eyes, and it can be very, very dangerous. So things like that. So you take a history, and they actually have to walk through a metal detector before they can get into zone 3. And zone 3 is just outside the magnet room. And then as you go into the zone 4 is the scanner. So we have and these are the ACR levels. And here's another slide that you'll get in your handout eventually with definitions of each of the levels. And this is the example of an MRI suite. The one thing is you'd want to make sure also that people that have pacemakers that are not MR compatible, that they can't accidentally, even if you got to make sure that the 5 Gauss line doesn't extend through the wall into the, just say, zone 2 area. So you could have the pacemaker malfunction, but the patient still isn't anywhere near the magnet. And that's here, in this case, this is the zone 2, the 5 Gauss line. This is the 1 Gauss line. And as you can see, the 5 Gauss line barely gets out of the actual scanning suite in this particular case. Here's the control room, and it does extend off to the side here where no patients could be. Many years ago, they used to not have these actively shielded magnets that will actually constrict the magnetic field as close as it can around the machine. And you'd have the 5 Gauss line all the way out in the control room. And before we had flat screen computers, you had like television screens, tubes, and they'd all be turned sideways from the magnetic field. So here's the same thing. So here's the different lines, and the 5 Gauss line, again, barely exits the room. So these are the standard labelings that we have in our areas for the different zones. So people hopefully see this. Despite all these things, every once in a while, someone will get a little bit closer than you expect them to. Sometimes someone will actually get into zone 3. Thankfully, almost never do they get into zone 4. So older generation pacemakers, most of them that are introduced now do not have a problem with 5 Gauss. Fringe fields of up to 10 Gauss may affect computers, and the older magnets that didn't have the active shielding, the control room may be at 10 Gauss. And fringe fields of 30 Gauss may magnetize your watch or erase your credit cards. Unfortunately, I have lived this one too many times, erasing my credit cards that we used to play guinea pig, that one of us would go in the magnet as the patient, another person would be the one running the magnet, and then we'd order pizza for dinner, and the person that was in the magnet jumps out, goes to pay with his credit card, and forgets and puts it back in his pocket and goes into the magnet, and now it's a useless piece of plastic. That's not so bad. Credit cards you can get again, but the subway cards, they're gone. So we have this is our screening form at New York Hospital, and the patient or the escort for the patient has to put down all this information. X-rays, if there are plain film X-rays, they'll usually be reviewed, and just to make sure we go through this whole thing. And this slide will be in the handout. It may be a little bit hard to read some of these just because it's small lettering on a slide. So as far as screening, you have absolute contraindications, relative contraindications. When can you put patients in? There's some devices that are going to be safe, but maybe not immediately, in a surgical patient. And then we're not going to talk about contrast media or NSF or the pregnancy, because that's already been discussed. Okay, so most electronically, magnetically, and mechanically activated implants, especially older ones, are not safe. And they may not be safe for a variety of reasons. They may not be safe because they'll stop working. They may not be safe because they are ferromagnetic and can have a significant pull. And the last thing that can make them unsafe is that the leads can act as antennas, collect radio frequency energy, and cause burns. And some of the pacemakers and neurostimulators, the leads are what causes the problem because they can cause burns at either end of the lead, internal burns. So this is an old slide. So at the time, all cardiac pacemakers were bad. Now that's not the case, but if a patient has a pacemaker, you have to know what they have. And usually you can find that in a chart. Sometimes people will have an information card in their wallet, but you can't just put them in the magnet. Magnetic splinter, metallic splinters in the eye, the old neuro clips for neuro that were ferromagnetic could be dangerous, and not from movement, but from the fact that, what is a clip? A clip is going to get in a magnetic field and try to align with the field. So there's a potential for damaging of blood vessels because the clip's going to try to turn. Anything that you can think of, can be a problem. Magnetic shavings have been known to cause, that get behind the eye, have been known to cause optic nerve damage when they move. Cochlear implants, insulin pumps, nerve stimulators, things like that you have to check. And where's a good where to check? MRI Safety. It's a great website. If you haven't been to it, go to it. And then you'll go look at stuff, and then there's MR Safe, basically safe, dangerous. Most things fall into the quote conditional category in the middle, and those are safe depending what you're doing. They may be safe at 1.5T, not 3T. Believe it or not, there are things that are only safe at 3T and not at 1.5. So they basically, depending on what you're doing, you can look and say, yeah, I'm going to do this type of a scan and run these kind of sequences, and the field strength is a certain thing, and then it's okay. This is, again, here's what I was saying, internal thermal effects. These can be very dangerous, and that's, again, because of usually antenna, something acting as an antenna. Something that's a loop of wire or a loop of a lead can cause a lot of problems because it can pick up the RF energy and conduct it to some point. So imagine a pacemaker that has all the leads coiled up in the pocket. It picks up RF energy and burns the point in the heart wherever it's attached. So surface burns, monitoring leads, electrodes, can heat, and you can get first, second, and third degree burns, and the patients usually don't know what's happening. They get severe burns, and it's very focal heating. You don't get it's not like you're putting them in boiling water. It's just focal at the lead and where it's touching, and it can really cause a problem. Few patients with tattoos, tattooed eye, especially the red, the blacks and some of the reds have iron in them. And depending on their shape, again, they can act like coils. So here's, some burns. Look at this baby that had something. Tattoo. So if a patient, you always should tell the patient if you feel something starts to, you give the patient a little button to push the button, because this is what can happen. See, there's a blister right over this crab. So it can, one of the worst ones I ever saw, I don't have a picture. It was a tattoo on the chest that was a bunch of concentric rings. It was just like it was a coil. So this was from a pulse oximeter on the finger. So, we talked about MR compatible a little bit already. MR compatible, there's sort of two things. There's MR compatible and MR imageable. They're kind of different. MR compatible means it's going to be safe. Something's MR safe will be safe to put you in the magnet. It still may affect the image and make a bad radiology image, but the patient won't get hurt. So what is ferromagnetic? Alloys, because some steel is even stainless steel. It could be stainless steel, medical grade steel, and if it's martinistic alloy, it's ferromagnetic. If it's an austenitic alloy, it's not. And it's a difference, usually it's a chemical structure of the metal. It's what's in there. There's iron, there's cobalt, there's nickel, and chromium, and a lot of it is, the nickel content is what makes a big change in whether it's ferromagnetic or not. And somewhere it was saying, someone was saying, is if it's something that's got points, like it's a screw and things like that, a lot of those are ferromagnetic or weakly ferromagnetic because they're harder and they don't break as easy as the non-ferromagnetic ones. So magnetic forces, torque on an object, we talked about twisting of aneurysm clips, twisting of other things that are in the body. Most of those are not a problem. They're small, they're very small. People used to worry about vena cava filters that were steel, that would be turned in the vessel. They really don't. But it's always safe to recent post-op patients for certain structures, certain implants, you should wait a period of weeks before so they get incorporated and they can move. I used to do imaging of patients with stents, and I'd take them right from the angiography suite and take them down to the magnet to image and see if we could see inside the stent. If it's the stents really do not have enough, even if they're ferromagnetic, they don't have enough force to worry about. The biggest problem then is if they haven't endothelialized yet, we were getting turbulence from going over the struts of the stent, and that was causing loss of signal. So here, implants that exhibit weakly magnetic qualities may be necessary to wait 6 weeks or more before performing an MR. That again, MRI safety is the way to go here. Now, biologic effects. You have to remember that the human body is a whole bunch of moving electrical charges. So when you move electrical charges in a magnetic field, it can generate electric currents. So you can get, patients can experience flashing lights if they move their head around. And they can actually get direct stimulation of the retina. And so that they feel that. And it's the changing magnetic field that are causing the nerves to discharge. You can get a variety of things. This says a magnetohydrodynamic effect. And what that really is it can even be from the blood flowing because it's got charges that can generate current. That really doesn't happen until you get up to extremely strong magnets. But some places, people have research magnets that are 7 Tesla or so. And if a patient shakes their head in the magnet, they sometimes get horribly nauseous because it's generating currents in their brain. So, that's the thing here, vertigo and nystagmus from moving there in the ear, moving in the brain. So patients should move slowly. Now, this is one thing that everybody has to worry about, and I'll be honest, the first thing I did, I had to have my knee MR'd, have an MR this fall. So what's the first thing I did? I got into the magnet and I crossed my feet because it was comfortable. And the tech rightly goes, no, don't do that, move them apart. Because you can get, if you just sit there and touch, just be like this, so your thumb is touching your side. You've set up a loop now that can collect RF energy, and if it's a very, very small contact zone, like your thumb touching your thigh, you're going to burn. So they're very careful to make sure that you're not crossing your legs, your hands are not touching your sides, or that your body itself is not touching the wall of the magnet, because you can get the same thing against the gantry. And these are resonant burns. This is where you get into the issues with different field strengths, where something may be safe at 1.5, not safe at 3, or safe at 3 and not safe at 1.5. If you have a wire, it's going to act as an antenna and absorb radio energy. If it is exactly a multiple of the resonant frequency of the magnet, it will start acting as an antenna. So at 1.5 Tesla, that length is 25 centimeters. At 3 Tesla, it's 12. At 7 Tesla, it's 4.5. So something that, depending on the length of the wires and the devices, they can be safe at 7 and not safe at 1.5 because you might get resonant heating. And again, a lot of this is all brought up in you're looking, if there's an implant and you're looking at it on their safety page, they'll tell you all this. One of the important things is if you really need to, go to the manufacturer's website. Some of the implants on the card have a QR code. You scan the QR code and it will take you to the most up-to-date information about safety of that product. So it's the same idea. I was just telling you, to prevent burns, you don't let people touch the thing, they don't touch the gantry. Everything's padded. And then, with the various gradient fields, as the gradients are ramping up and down to get your image, you can get nerve stimulation, cardiac stimulation, and nystagmus, even if the patient isn't moving. It's because the gradients are changing in order for you to basically draw your image. Cryogen hazards. Well, most magnets are superconducting magnets, and they are filled with liquid helium or liquid nitrogen. You usually have helium, and then they have liquid nitrogen to try to keep the liquid helium cold because it's hard to keep it cold and it's very expensive. So you want to preserve it as much as you can. However, they are so cold that if for some reason you get into contact with them, they're going to basically just freeze you almost instantly. So the MRs have to be very, very careful that, let me back up. All the MRs are constantly losing gas. That helium and particularly the nitrogen are slowly being boiled off, and they do get compressed and recaptured and put back in the magnet, but some of them do escape. And that's why usually there's a big pipe with a magnet that goes outside, and that keeps any escaping gas out of the room. Because one of the things you do have to worry about is if it gets into the room, it's going to displace all the oxygen, and that's not good for living people. We'll talk about quenching first, but we'll get to that. So you've got to make sure there's oxygen. Quenching is deactivating the magnet. So how do you, there's a variety of quenching, and when there's accidental quenching, the magnet will quench itself, and that will happen if the cryogen gets above a critical temperature. It's just going to start boiling, and the magnet quenches. Hopefully that never happens, because then you've lost all your cryogen, and then you've got to start over. There's also the emergency quench. How do we do that? You've got a patient stuck in the magnet, and there's no way to get them out because they're trapped behind the wheelchair. How do you get them out? Push the button. There's usually some big red button somewhere that says "Do not push in case of unless it's an emergency," because when you push that button, you do two things. First, it opens the valve and lets the cryogen go right out the door or out the window. They also don't like that done accidentally because in the United States, quenching a magnet's about $50,000 worth of cryogen just went out the window. The other thing is the rapid heating of the magnet can also damage the magnet such that you've ruined it. That doesn't always happen, but these magnets are the magnetic coils that generate the coils that generate the magnetic field are still electrical wires. They're very, very fine electrical wires. And down when they're super cooled, they don't heat up. The energy goes in there. As it starts to warm up, they become resistive magnets. They start heating, the coil of wire itself heats up. And if it heats up enough, it can actually melt the coils, the coils that generate the magnetic field. And then the machines are ruined. So you don't want to push that button lightly. Uh-oh, we lost ourselves again. So you don't want to push that button very late, but if you have to, you have to. What's going on now? It doesn't like me. So, as I said, superconductive magnet will become resistive and heat will be released and it will keep boiling this off. Does the magnetic field shut off instantly? Someone said no. Everybody agree? It doesn't shut off until there's enough cryogen gone that it stops being a superconductive magnet. It may actually take minutes for it to shut off. It has to get warm enough. So it may be that it's hard to do. If the helium escapes into the room, there's risk of frostbite and asphyxiation and injury from the people running away from this. I don't have a picture of it, but there's a picture somewhere that you look at, there's an exhaust pipe at the top of a magnet that was quenched, and it looks like it has ice on it. Well, it is ice, but it's not water, it's frozen air. It's literally the gases in the atmosphere that have frozen solid on top of it. So this was one, and I was out in California back in 2000, and I hear about, oh my God, there's somebody that got killed in an MRI in New York City. And I'm like, oh, please don't let it be our hospital. It was. And what it was is there was a magnet that was being installed. And General Electric at the time, for a 3 Tesla magnet, they were buying their magnets from Varian in England. And they were having some trouble with this installation, so they called over to England, and someone from England said, okay, we'll send you a technician from Varian. He got on the plane, came over, and went straight in to start working. And the problem, unfortunately, is they didn't have the oxygen alarms and the various stuff hooked up yet, and it turns out there was a leak in the cryogen. So the room had no oxygen in it. And the worst thing that you can do is when you walk into this room is breathe the air that's in there. Because the first thing that's going to happen is as you breathe, it's going to displace all the oxygen that's in your blood within a couple of breaths. So the best thing you can do is hold your breath, go in, go out. You'll be fine. You can't exhale and breathe in more because it'll literally suck the oxygen out of your blood. And that's what happened. And that says 6 other people were injured. That was one of those was one of my favorite technologists that had gone in to try to, saw it and tried to pull the person out. But they tried to breathe in there. It doesn't work. But anyway, unfortunately, it was due to a problem. So here's an example of a quench in the lab. There's all the cryogen boiling away. It's not much to see, just a big cloud. Here's a research magnet that was in a truck, and when they decided to quench it, that's it coming out. So in the event that there's a quench accidentally or deliberately, everyone should leave the area and it should be evacuated, and people should just wait for safety. If there's a patient in there, you're going to have to adjust and deal with that and get them out of there. Now, let's see, we've kind of touched on all these, so we won't do that. Now, other things, the things you don't think about is noise. The MRI makes noise. Those ramping magnetic gradients can be awfully loud. It's also interesting, if you're in the magnet long enough, you know exactly what sequence is running by what it sounds like. But they can be very loud, up to 120 decibels, which is damaging to the hearing, and you should provide headphones or earplugs or something like that. And usually you get there, they give you a nice headphone so you can sit and they ask you what your favorite music is, and you get to listen to that during the thing. But it really can cause hearing loss. A lot of people are claustrophobic. I'm sure all of you have had to deal with that. This 7-foot long tunnel that's only this big, some people just are not going to go in there, no matter what you do. And some people do have to be sedated. Usually discussing it slowly. Close your eyes, don't look. It helps. It also helps if you're only doing a knee and your head isn't inside. But if they're imaging the brain, there's not much choice. It's going to have to be in the isocenter of the magnet. So we've got some cases. You're in the emergency department, reading a room, and a tech calls saying the patient has an implanted pump of some sort, but the patient doesn't remember the details. But the patient had an MRI before and had no problems, and their private medical doctor said, oh, don't worry about it. Do you scan that person? Absolutely not. They may have had an MRI before, but as I said, you don't know the parameters that scan was done. It could be that it was a 3 Tesla and whatever it is safe at 1.5, at 3, but not at 1.5. You can't do that. You have to know what's in there. So where do you find that information? Records, charts, physical MRI Safety, the manufacturer's website, and it says ask an attending. This is usually geared towards the residents. Usually the attending has no idea either. Go back to all these. Many times the resident that has to deal with the patient in the scanner, the attendings usually don't deal with the patient in the scanner. Okay, case 2. There have been several city power outages that have affected the hospitals in the past few years. If you come around one of these MRIs, that it's had a power off, it's been off for a couple days. There's no lights, no computers. What is the biggest worry? Is that magnetic field still there? No. Oh yes, it is. A superconducting magnet, if it's still cold, it will continue to be a magnet literally, potentially for weeks. If it's still cold, it's still working. It's still making a magnetic force. It has to warm up enough, and then it will become resistive, and that will stop it. So that's the big worry, is people may have, we got to go check the lights, we got to go this, that. You still have to pretend that the magnet is at full strength. Magnets are always on, even when the power is off. It takes a very long time to stop. Case 3, you're doing an injection, you're moonlighting, and in between patients, you absentmindedly bring your laptop into the scanner, and you don't notice, and it goes flying out of your hands and into the magnet. What should you do? Usually tell somebody. Every place should have a procedure, who to call. Don't try to pull it out yourself. If it's something like it's your ID and it's still magnetic, and probably everybody's had their ID, that you go into the magnet, and your ID is like this from your neck. Those you can certainly pull out. But the important thing is there a patient? Has the patient been injured? And then follow the protocol for taking things out. So first, access any patient, remove them from the room. Exit the MRI, tell the supervisor. They know don't usually try to remove anything, because just like that chair I showed you, they fragment. As you're pulling it out, it may break. And that may cause a second missile injury. So if you've got a patient and just say something went in and it's sticking to the corner here, if you pull it out and it breaks, it may have a piece that goes back in and then hurts the patient. So don't do that. How do they get them? Okay, you've got an oxygen bottle that went into the magnet, and the patient's fine. There's nothing, no patient. How do you get it out of there? Do you quench the magnet? Do you slowly ramp the magnet down, which takes about a week, to slowly turn it off? You reverse the current on it, slowly turn it off, so that you don't damage the magnet coils. Well, what they actually do, and what they do on the scanners that we have, is the door frame around the room is reinforced. So they can put a bar across the door frame, and they can use a winch, and they put a Kevlar bag over the oxygen bottle, and you literally winch it out. And you just click, 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 and you can pull it out. Once it gets far enough, you can just take it away. So there's always a mechanism built into the scanner suite that it's in order to be able to do that. So we talked about the safety zones. Zone 1 is outside the MRI department. Zone 2, patients have undergone some type of screening, and that's where they're doing the screening. Zone 3 is you want to make sure that they don't, by that point, they shouldn't have anything ferromagnetic. You should know what kind of implants they have before they actually enter the MR room. So you overhear a nurse yell that the patient in the scanner is not responding, not breathing, and doesn't have a pulse. The tech is alerting the code team. Another nurse is going to retrieve the code card. What should you do? Exactly. Do not let them into the room. No matter what. No one goes into that room with any kind of a cart, oxygen, anything. Get the patient out of the room. You know, there should already be the MR compatible stretcher there. Get them on that and get them out. And once you get them at least to zone 3, you should be able to treat them. A 25-year-old female says she's taking birth control, states she cannot be pregnant. Do you have to, and it's a scan that's going to have contrast, do you have to screen those patients for pregnancy? Yes, because you know, contrast is the only reason you really have to screen, because you know, pregnancy and IV gadolinium contrast is a contraindication. So everybody talks about just gadolinium. Do we inject gadolinium into patients? Right. If you just injected gadolinium, you'd kill every patient. It's a very, very toxic metal, and that's one of the big worries when it sticks around in the blood system, that the chelation breaks down and it releases elemental gadolinium, which ends up being a strong neurotoxin. Okay, our patient reports that his kidneys don't work very well anymore. And you see that his creatinine is 203 micromoles per liter, and that was just yesterday, so I knew it's a good number. And the nurse says he can't have contrast. Is that true? No. What do you do? I just hear mumbling, so I need someone a little louder. You'd give contrast, but do you want to change which contrast you use? You use group 2 or 3. It's the group 1 contrast, especially Omniscan, that have almost all the cases. And what are they worrying about? Yeah, the NSF, the nephrogenic systemic fibrosis. How many cases of that have ever happened? It's like 10. There's very, very few, but it's also a horrible, in one of my talks I had pictures of it, it's a horrible debilitating disease. Very, very, very uncommon. So use group 2 or group 3 agents, and it occurs in frequency in patients given higher amounts, so you dose by weight. Back when I started, you know, at one point, when people, before anyone knew about NSF, we used to use, you know, well, let me back up. Dr. Chatterley's talk, it says, what is, you know, what are the properties of the contrast, the MR contrast, T1 relaxation, T2, whatever. And he had block X-rays. Yeah, it does block X-rays. Not as well as iodine, but it does block X-rays. We use gadolinium for patients that we want to use a liquid contrast agent, and they're so allergic that they can't get iodinated contrast. So we'll use a gadolinium-based contrast for that. Doesn't give as good a pictures. We can't give enough of it to do much, but if it's something small, we'll use that, or even use it for biliary drainages or tube checks for people because it does block X-rays. And it actually works pretty well. But before we knew about NSF, we literally used to give the gadolinium like water. Oh, you need more? We'll just give more. And still, thankfully, we never saw a case. So if a patient had renal failure, we would deliberately do the arteriogram with a gadolinium-based product. So for more information, you know, you can go to ACR Quality, MRISafety.com. That's your best friend. And that's the end of this talk.